Let's start by understanding what game theory really is. At its core, game theory is the science of strategy. It's a way to understand how people make decisions when outcomes depend not just on their own choices, but also on what others choose to do. It's about the hidden rules behind real-world interactions, between individuals, businesses, even nations, where each player is trying to make the smartest move in response to everyone else. Picture this. You're at a four-way stop. No lights, no signs, just four drivers staring at each other, each trying to figure out when to go. Who moves first? Who yields? Your choice isn't made in a vacuum. It hinges on what the others do or what you think they're about to do. That moment, quiet, tense, uncertain, is a perfect example of what game theory helps us analyze. To make sense of these situations, game theory breaks things down into a few key pieces. There are players, the decision makers, strategies, the options each player has, and payoffs, the results of each combination of choices. Game theory doesn't say what's morally right or wrong. It just maps out what happens when each choice interacts with another, like pieces on a chessboard, but where the pieces think for themselves. Sometimes the game is played once. Sometimes it repeats. Some games invite cooperation, others drive competition. But across all of them, patterns emerge. Bluffing, hesitation, trust, betrayal. These aren't just outcomes, they're mental moves, and game theory gives us a way to model the thought process itself. In short, it's not about playing games. It's about recognizing that life is full of them. The job interview, the pricing war, the silent standoff at the four-way stop. Game theory is the language we use to understand these strategic moments and what really drives the decisions behind them. Why does game theory matter? Most decisions in life aren't made in isolation. You make a move, someone else responds, and suddenly you're not just deciding, you're part of a system. That's exactly why game theory matters. Game theory gives us a structured way to think about situations where outcomes depend on the choices of multiple people. It's the logic behind strategy. It helps explain why people cooperate in some cases and compete in others, why trust forms or breaks, and why sometimes even smart decisions lead to bad results. What makes game theory so useful is that it doesn't just describe what people should do, it tries to predict what they will do, especially when everyone is trying to outthink everyone else. That's not just useful in academic models, it shows up constantly in real life. Take something as simple as standing in line. If someone cuts ahead, you instantly calculate whether it's worth confronting them. You weigh the social discomfort, the chance of an argument, the presence of others. Without realizing it, you're playing a game, making a decision based on how you expect another person to react. Now stretch that idea to bigger decisions, like companies setting prices. If one lowers its price, the others might follow to stay competitive. But if they all lower prices, profits drop. Each business wants to do what's best for itself, but their choices are deeply linked. Game theory helps model these interactions, revealing when it's best to act alone and when cooperation makes more sense, even among rivals. The same logic applies to international relations. Imagine two countries, both stockpiling weapons. Each is thinking, if we stop, they might keep going. So neither side backs down, even if peace would benefit both. That's a strategic dilemma. Game theory helps map the risks and motivations that drive these high-stakes decisions. But it's not just about tension or competition. Game theory also sheds light on teamwork, negotiations, voting, and even parenting. It helps explain how people make deals, form alliances, and decide when to compromise or stand firm. It's not about manipulating outcomes. It's about understanding them better. And that's where the real value lies. Game theory gives people a clearer picture of how choices interact. It encourages thinking a few steps ahead, anticipating how others might respond, and how that response changes your own best move. It's not just about what's right or wrong. It's about being strategic in a world where other people have plans too. Game theory offers more than answers. It offers clarity. In moments of conflict, cooperation, or uncertainty, it gives us a lens to understand how decisions unfold, and why outcomes often depend on more than just individual logic. For anyone who wants to navigate shared decisions with a bit more insight, that makes it more than a theory. It makes it a tool worth knowing. Where did game theory begin? The idea of game theory didn't start with video games or even board games. It started with math and a surprisingly practical question. How do people make decisions when other people are also trying to win? Game theory officially took shape in the early 20th century, but the roots go much further back. For centuries, thinkers had explored strategy in different forms: military tactics, political maneuvering, even chess. But those were mostly informal. There wasn't a clear mathematical way to analyze decisions involving multiple people with different goals. That changed in 1944. That year, a mathematician named John von Neumann and an economist named Oscar Morgenstern published a book titled The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. It was the first serious attempt to turn strategic decision-making into a science. They weren't interested in just guessing what people might do. They wanted to build models, structured, logical systems that could actually explain and predict behavior in competitive situations. At the heart of their idea was something called a zero-sum game. That's a situation where one person's gain is exactly another person's loss, like in poker or chess or war. Von Neumann had already proven a key idea years earlier, that every two-player zero-sum game had at least one solution where both players could pick strategies that kept them from being outmaneuvered. That insight became the foundation for a whole new field. But game theory didn't stay limited to zero-sum games. In the 1950s, another mathematician, John Nash, expanded it. He introduced what's now known as the Nash Equilibrium, a point in a game where no player can improve their outcome by changing their strategy, as long as the others stay the same. That shifted the focus from pure winners and losers to a more realistic picture of strategy, where people often settle into patterns that are stable, even if they're not perfect. As these ideas developed, game theory found its way into economics, politics, and biology. Economists began using it to understand competition between companies and the dynamics of markets. Political scientists applied it to voting systems and international negotiations. Biologists used it to explain how animals cooperate or compete for survival. What started as abstract math turned into a powerful way to describe real-world behavior. What made game theory so groundbreaking wasn't just the math, it was the perspective. It showed that strategic behavior could be analyzed, predicted, and even optimized. It gave structure to situations that used to be explained only by gut instinct or experience. It showed that even when everyone's acting in their own interest, the overall outcome can still follow patterns that we can understand. The idea of game theory came from trying to make sense of competition, but it ended up giving us a language for decision-making itself. It's a way to see how individuals, organizations, or nations interact, not just by what they want, but by how they anticipate what others want too. What were the biggest breakthroughs in game theory? Game theory isn't just built on smart ideas. It's built on strategic turning points that transformed how we understand decision-making. While the foundations were laid by early pioneers, its biggest breakthroughs came from the concepts that reshaped entire fields of thought. One such breakthrough was the Nash Equilibrium. Instead of focusing on pure winners and losers, it revealed how individuals settle into strategies that feel stable, where no one has anything to gain by acting alone. This wasn't just a theoretical insight. It provided a way to model realistic human behavior in situations where interests overlap, clash, or both. Whether in business rivalries or social negotiations, it showed how people can lock into patterns, not because they're ideal, but because they're self-reinforcing. Another leap came from the idea of strategic signaling, explored deeply by Thomas Schelling. His work showed how nations and individuals shape behavior through subtle cues, threats, promises, silence. In diplomacy, these signals can carry as much weight as actual action. Schelling's insight wasn't about brute power, it was about perception. The ability to communicate intent without direct communication changed how we understand negotiation and risk. The field also advanced through the study of repeated games, especially via the work of Robert Axelrod. His research asked a powerful question: can cooperation survive in a world driven by self-interest? Through computer simulations, he showed how simple, consistent strategies like tit for tat could lead to lasting trust. Cooperation didn't have to be enforced. It could emerge naturally over time, especially when interactions weren't just one-off moments. Later developments pushed game theory beyond economics and politics. In biology, the theory helped explain animal behavior, why some species fight while others cooperate. In behavioral science, it helped unpack why humans often defy rational models in favor of fairness, emotion, or instinct. These expansions weren't just side notes. They redefined what counted as strategy. The breakthroughs that shaped game theory didn't just solve abstract problems. They gave us tools to understand real-life interactions. They made it possible to see strategy not as manipulation, but as a framework, one that explains how people navigate uncertainty, align incentives, and shape outcomes in a world full of other decision-makers. What are the basic elements of any game in game theory? Every game in game theory, no matter how complex, is built from just a few basic parts. Once you understand those parts, you can start to see the structure behind all kinds of real-world decisions, from business rivalries to casual conversations. The first element is players. A player is anyone who makes a choice in the game. This could be a person, a company, a government, any decision-making entity. If two people are deciding whether to split a bill or argue over it, that's two players. If a company is reacting to what its competitors are doing, those competitors are players too. Identifying the players is the first step in setting up any game theoretic model. Next comes strategies. A strategy is the full set of choices available to a player. It's not just one move, it's the plan. For a player in a game, their strategy includes every action they could take in every possible situation. In a simple game like rock, paper, scissors, the strategies are obvious. You can choose rock, paper, or scissors. In a negotiation, the strategies might be more complex, ranging from giving in to walking away to holding firm and waiting. The important thing is that strategies cover all the possible decisions a player could make. Then, there are payoffs. A payoff is the outcome a player gets, depending on the combination of strategies chosen by everyone in the game. It's the result. In a friendly bet, a payoff might be winning or losing $5. In a pricing war between companies, the payoff could be market share or profit margins. Payoffs can be numerical or just rankings of outcomes. What matters is that they represent what each player values. There's also the concept of rules, though in game theory, rules aren't always written down like in a board game. They define what's allowed, what the players know, what they can do, whether they can communicate, and whether the game is played once or multiple times. Some games are simultaneous. Players move at the same time without knowing what the other will do. Others are sequential. One moves after the other, with the second player reacting to the first. And finally, there's information. This refers to what each player knows when making a decision. In some games, everyone knows everything. These are called games of perfect information, like chess. In others, players are in the dark about each other's strategies or intentions. These are games of incomplete or imperfect information, like poker or business negotiations. Put together, these elements, players, strategies, payoffs, rules, and information, create the full framework of a game. They tell us who's involved, what they can do, what they want, how the game works, and what they know. With just these parts, game theorists can model everything from casual choices to global conflicts. It's a stripped-down way of understanding the deep structure behind how decisions play out when more than one mind is involved. What is the difference between zero-sum and non-zero-sum games? In many situations, one person's win doesn't have to mean another person's loss, but sometimes it does. That's the core idea behind the difference between zero-sum and non-zero-sum games in game theory. A zero-sum game is one where the total amount of gain and loss is fixed. Whatever one player wins, the other loses in equal measure. The sum of gains and losses always adds up to zero. The classic example is a poker game. If one player walks away with $50, that money has to come from the other players at the table. In this kind of setup, success comes directly at someone else's expense. Another everyday example could be a sports match. One team wins, the other loses. There's no shared victory. The outcome is a straight trade. Points, wins, or rewards are transferred, not created. These kinds of games are highly competitive by design. There's no way for everyone to benefit at the same time. On the other hand, non-zero-sum games are different. In these situations, the outcome doesn't have to cancel out. It's possible for all players to benefit, or for everyone to lose. The total result can be more than zero or less. It's flexible. Think of two companies deciding whether to compete aggressively or cooperate on a shared project. If they compete, both might drive down profits. But if they collaborate, maybe by splitting resources or entering different markets, they can both do better than if they try to undercut each other. A more basic example is two roommates deciding how to share chores. If they both cooperate, the apartment gets clean with less effort from each. If one slacks off and the other picks up the slack, resentment builds. But if they both refuse to clean, they both live in a mess. In this case, cooperation creates a better outcome for both. That's a non-zero-sum interaction. Understanding the difference between these two types of games helps clarify how people behave in different settings. Zero-sum games often encourage competition and secrecy. If you're in a position where someone else's gain is automatically your loss, you're more likely to protect your strategies, make aggressive moves, or avoid sharing information. But in non-zero-sum situations, openness and collaboration can actually lead to better results for everyone involved. This distinction also explains why people sometimes make surprising choices. In non-zero-sum games, players may act generously or build trust, not because they're being selfless, but because helping others can also help themselves. In contrast, zero-sum thinking leads to short-term wins but can make cooperation feel risky or even impossible. Game theory uses this framework to analyze real-world decisions, from business deals to environmental agreements to daily negotiations. It helps explain when competition makes sense and when working together might actually lead to better outcomes for all players. By recognizing which kind of game is being played, people can better choose strategies that match the situation, not just their instincts. Why is the Nash Equilibrium such a big deal? In most situations involving multiple people, decisions aren't made in a vacuum. Each person is thinking not just about their own choices, but also about what everyone else might do. The Nash Equilibrium is important because it captures that exact idea and turns it into something we can actually work with. John Nash introduced a new way to think about strategy. He asked, what happens when each player in a game chooses the best possible strategy they can, based on what they think the others will do, and no one wants to change their mind afterward? That's a Nash equilibrium. It's a point where every player's choice is the best response to everyone else's choices. No one gains anything by going solo and doing something different. Let's break it down with a simple example. Imagine two competing coffee shops on the same street. Each has to decide whether to charge a high price or a low price. If both charge high, they split profits evenly. If one goes low and the other stays high, the one with the lower price gets more customers. If both go low, profits drop for both. Each shop has to make a choice based on what the other might do. The Nash equilibrium in this case is the pricing decision where neither shop has an incentive to change their price, given what the other one is doing. What makes this concept so powerful is that it doesn't rely on cooperation, trust, or even communication. It works even when players are acting purely in their own interest. It also doesn't assume that the outcome is the best one for everyone. It just shows where things naturally settle when everyone is trying to do what's best for themselves, assuming others are doing the same. Nash's insight extended game theory far beyond earlier models that only worked for pure win-lose scenarios. His equilibrium applied to a much broader range of situations, competitive, cooperative, or somewhere in between. It allowed economists, political analysts, and scientists to start modeling real-world decisions in ways that were much closer to how people actually behave. The Nash equilibrium also gave game theory something it was missing: predictability. When multiple outcomes are possible, this concept helps narrow down which ones are likely to happen. It tells us where the system might settle, where strategies become stable, and change stops making sense. In business, politics, biology, and everyday life, the Nash equilibrium helps explain why people don't always chase the highest possible reward and why certain patterns repeat even when better outcomes seem available. It's not about perfection. It's about balance, the kind that holds together when everyone's looking out for themselves. That's what makes it such a central idea in game theory. Why do trust and self-interest clash? Sometimes, the best possible outcome is only possible if people trust each other. But the biggest personal reward often comes from breaking that trust. That's the tension at the heart of so many decisions, and it shows up far more often than we realize. In game theory, this conflict plays out when individuals have a choice: protect themselves or take a chance on someone else. The problem is, when everyone faces that same decision, doubt starts to spread. Even if working together could help everyone, no one wants to be the one who gets left behind. You see this in business, politics, and everyday life. Two companies might benefit from keeping prices stable, but if one drops their prices to steal customers, the other is forced to react, and both end up worse off. Or imagine two countries agreeing to reduce emissions. If one cheats to boost its economy while the other sticks to the deal, the entire agreement starts to unravel. This tension shows up in what's known as the prisoner's dilemma, a situation where two people could get a better outcome by trusting each other, but both are tempted to look out for themselves. We'll explore why that setup causes so many problems next. What matters in these situations isn't just the decision itself, it's the structure around it. Are people going to face each other again in the future? Or is this a one-time choice? Is there a way to enforce trust? Or are you relying on good faith alone? These questions shape whether people lean toward working together or protecting their own interests. Game theory gives us a way to see that structure more clearly. It helps explain why even smart people with good intentions sometimes make decisions that leave everyone worse off, and how that pattern can repeat unless the rules of the game are changed. Why does the prisoner's dilemma matter so much? It's one of the simplest scenarios in game theory, yet it keeps showing up in the real world, in politics, business, and everyday life. The prisoner's dilemma matters because it captures a frustrating truth. Sometimes, doing what's best for yourself ends up being worse for everyone involved. Here's how it works. Two people are arrested for a crime. The police separate them and offer each the same deal. If one confesses, while the other stays silent, the one who confesses goes free, and the other gets a long sentence. If both confess, they both get a moderate sentence. But if both stay silent, the punishment is light for each. They're not allowed to communicate. They have to guess what the other will do. So each person thinks, if the other stays quiet, I should confess and go free. But if they confess, I'd better confess too, or I'll get stuck with the worst deal. That line of thinking leads both to confess, even though staying silent would have given them both a better result. Acting in pure self-interest lands them in a worse position than if they had cooperated. That's the dilemma. The logical move for each person, confessing, leads to a worse outcome than if they had trusted each other. But trust isn't safe here. And that's what makes this setup so powerful. It shows how rational choices can create irrational results when people can't coordinate. This isn't just a thought experiment. The structure shows up in everything from business rivalries to global diplomacy. Picture two companies competing for the same market. If both launch aggressive ad campaigns, they cancel each other out and waste money. If they both hold back, they save costs. But each fears the other will strike first, so they both go all in and both lose. Or think of countries negotiating climate agreements. If every country reduces emissions, everyone benefits from a cleaner planet. But each nation also thinks, if others cut back, I can keep growing my economy and enjoy the benefits anyway. When everyone thinks that way, cooperation collapses, and everyone faces the consequences. The prisoner's dilemma reveals how fragile cooperation can be when trust isn't guaranteed. Even when people or groups clearly see a better shared outcome, they may not reach it if they're afraid of being left behind. It shows why some problems persist, not because people are selfish, but because the structure of the situation rewards self-protection more than mutual trust. In game theory, it's one of the most studied models because of how often its logic appears in everyday life. It helps explain why competition can escalate, why agreements can fall apart, and why even smart players can make choices that don't add up to the best result. The simplicity of the dilemma is deceptive, because underneath it is a blueprint for understanding some of the most complex standoffs in human behavior. What can we learn from the stag hunt and the chicken game? Not every decision is about winning or losing. Sometimes it's about timing, trust, and how much risk you're willing to take. That's what makes the stag hunt and the chicken game two of the most interesting models in game theory. They're not just about strategy, They're about how people weigh safety against ambition and fear against pride. The stag hunt goes like this. Two hunters go into the forest. They can each choose to hunt a stag together or hunt a rabbit on their own. If they work together, they catch the stag and share a large reward. But if one goes for the stag while the other plays it safe and grabs a rabbit, the stag hunter gets nothing. It's a simple setup with a deeper message. Cooperation leads to the best outcome, but only if both people commit. If either one doubts the other's intentions, they're better off settling for something smaller. This scenario maps onto real-life decisions all the time. Two companies might consider merging to take on a bigger competitor, but if either pulls out last minute, the other is left exposed. Or two colleagues might consider sharing credit for a big project, unless one thinks the other might not follow through. In a stag hunt, trust is everything. The risk isn't that you lose, it's that you take a chance on someone else and they don't do the same. Now contrast that with the chicken game, which works differently. Here, two drivers race toward each other on a narrow road. If one swerves and the other doesn't, the one who swerved is called a chicken. They lose face, but avoid a crash. If neither swerves, they both lose badly. But if both swerve, they both avoid the crash, though without the same bravado. The danger here isn't about failing to cooperate. It's about waiting to see who gives in first. This dynamic plays out in real-world standoffs, trade disputes, political showdowns, even schoolyard arguments. Each side wants to stand firm, hoping the other will back down. But the longer the standoff lasts, the higher the risk. The chicken game is about pride, bluffing, and brinkmanship. Winning isn't just about the outcome. It's about being the last to flinch. Both games offer different lessons. The stag hunt teaches that shared success depends on mutual confidence. If everyone commits, the rewards are high, but any doubt causes people to settle for less. The chicken game, meanwhile, shows how pressure and pride can trap people in risky positions, where holding firm might impress others, but can also lead to disaster. Game theory uses models like these to explain how people make decisions when trust or tension is involved. They help make sense of everything from group projects to international crises, not by simplifying them, but by revealing the hidden structure underneath. The more clearly we can see these patterns, the better we can understand how cooperation builds or breaks under pressure. Where does fairness come into play in strategic choices? People don't just care about outcomes, they care about whether those outcomes feel fair. Even in strategic decision-making, where logic and self-interest usually take center stage, fairness still has surprising power. In game theory, most models assume people act to maximize their own benefit, but in real life, people often reject deals that would technically help them, if they believe those deals are unfair. One of the clearest examples of this is the ultimatum game. In this setup, two players are involved. One is given a sum of money and told to offer a portion to the second player. The second player can either accept or reject the offer. If they accept, both get the money. If they reject it, both walk away with nothing. Logically, the second player should accept any amount above zero. Something is better than nothing. But that's not what usually happens. When the offer is seen as unfair, say just 10% of the total, many people reject the deal entirely, even if it means losing money. They'd rather walk away than feel taken advantage of. And this reaction isn't just emotional, it's strategic. It sends a message. If you treat me unfairly, I won't play along. This instinct appears everywhere. In business negotiations, deals that seem lopsided often fall apart. In teams, unequal credit or blame can fracture cooperation. In politics, Policies that feel unbalanced spark public backlash. Fairness affects not just what people want, but what they'll accept. Game theory has evolved to reflect this. Behavioral game theory blends classic strategy with psychology, showing that fairness, emotion, and social norms influence decisions just as much as payoff calculations. People don't just respond to outcomes, they respond to how those outcomes are framed and how they reflect their values. And fairness doesn't always mean splitting things 50-50. Sometimes it's about effort, risk, or context. But across cultures and scenarios, the pattern holds. When people feel mistreated, they're often willing to lose something just to make a point. That's not bad strategy. It's a different kind of logic. One rooted in dignity, trust, and the long-term consequences of how we treat each other. Why do humans sometimes ignore the rational move? Sometimes people make choices that don't seem to add up. They pass up free money, stick with bad deals, or turn down opportunities that look objectively beneficial. On paper, it doesn't look rational, but humans don't always follow the logic that game theory expects. Take the ultimatum game. We've already seen how people often reject unfair offers, even if it costs them. That's not irrational. It reflects deeper values like dignity and fairness. In traditional game theory, the assumption is that people act to maximize their benefit. Money, safety, influence, or anything else measurable. But in real life, people break from that logic all the time, and not randomly. They do it in ways that reflect emotions, social expectations, and internal principles. People aren't just trying to win a round. They think about relationships, long-term effects, and how their decisions reflect who they are. From that perspective, turning down a lopsided deal isn't a mistake. It's a signal. It says, I won't reward unfairness, even at a cost. Emotion also plays a huge role. The best strategy on paper might offer the highest average outcome, but people don't always think in averages. They think in regrets, in risks, in gut feelings. If a move carries even a small chance of humiliation or loss, it might be avoided entirely, especially if someone's been burned before. Another challenge is limited information. Most real-world decisions don't come with a full picture. People estimate, guess, and rely on instinct. The rational move might not feel safe when others' intentions are unknown or unpredictable. That's why game theory has evolved into behavioral game theory, which blends strategy with psychology. People don't just chase payoffs. They react to framing, emotion, and context. What looks irrational from the outside often makes perfect sense when you consider the human experience behind it. Game theory helps map out decision-making, but human behavior adds the missing dimension: memory, meaning, and emotion. And in that fuller picture, logic is still important, but it's only part of the story. What happens when emotions and strategy collide? Sometimes, people don't do what makes the most sense on paper. They make a choice that feels right in the moment, even if it costs them. That's what happens when strategy runs into emotion, and it's one of the biggest reasons decisions don't always follow logic. In many situations, the best outcome depends on clear thinking. We expect people to look at the options, calculate the risks, and pick the smartest move. But humans don't operate like calculators. They get angry. They feel insulted. They want to be respected, not just rewarded. And those feelings can change the outcome entirely. A simple example is the offer reject scenario often used in studies. One person is given a sum of money and asked to share a portion with someone else. If the second person accepts, both keep the money. If they reject it, no one gets anything. You'd expect people to accept even a small share. After all, some money is better than none. But that's not what usually happens. If the offer feels unfair, many reject it out of frustration. The logic is clear, but the emotion is stronger. What's happening here isn't a mistake, it's a message. People want to feel valued. If they sense they're being treated poorly, they're often willing to take a loss just to make a point. That reaction might seem irrational, but it serves a purpose. It pushes back against imbalance. It says, "Don't treat me like that again." Emotions like anger, pride, or embarrassment aren't separate from the decision. They are part of the decision. Someone who feels insulted might refuse to compromise, even when it would help both sides. Someone who's afraid of losing face might hold their ground just to avoid appearing weak. And someone who's been burned before might hesitate to trust, even when trust would lead to a better outcome. In situations that involve other people, negotiations, standoffs, deals, emotion becomes part of the calculation. It influences not just what people want, but what they're willing to accept. Even in high-level diplomacy or business, decisions often hinge on how a situation makes someone feel, not just what it offers on paper. That's why emotional insight is just as important as strategy. Understanding what someone values, respect, fairness, dignity, can be the key to unlocking cooperation or diffusing tension. And being aware of your own reactions can prevent a moment of frustration from turning into a long-term loss. When emotions and strategy collide, things get messy, but also more human. The smartest move isn't always the one with the biggest reward. Sometimes it's the one that makes someone feel heard, understood, or respected. And that's not weakness. It's part of what keeps the whole system from falling apart. Where does game theory show up in everyday life? Even a simple decision, like whether to hold the elevator or let it close, can have more strategy behind it than it seems. Many of the choices people make every day are shaped by the same logic, used to analyze business deals, military standoffs, and high-stakes negotiations. It just happens on a smaller, more personal scale. Take something as ordinary as merging lanes in traffic. You can speed up to get ahead or slow down and let someone else in. What you choose depends not only on what you want, but on what you expect the other driver to do. If they accelerate, you might back off. If they hesitate, you might take the chance. That back and forth, where each person adjusts based on the other, is a form of strategic thinking. It's not formal or calculated, but it's real. The same kind of reasoning plays out in relationships. Deciding when to apologize, when to speak up, or when to let something go often depends on how someone thinks the other person will react. Being too aggressive can damage trust. Being too passive can create imbalance. People learn to navigate these dynamics over time, often without realizing they're balancing strategy and emotion to maintain connection. Even texting habits can reflect this thinking. Choosing when to reply, how long to wait, or whether to double text all involve expectations about the other person's response. If a message is ignored, someone might stop trying. If they always get quick replies, they might feel encouraged. It's a dance of interpretation and adjustment. At work, decisions about collaboration or credit often carry strategic weight. Should you take the lead on a project or support someone else's idea? Speak up in a meeting or stay quiet and observe? These decisions aren't just about ambition, they're shaped by social dynamics, incentives, and how outcomes are shared. People often consider the risks of being seen as too forward or not visible enough. Every action has a reaction, and that awareness guides behavior. Shopping also involves strategic behavior, especially in competitive environments. Waiting for a sale, choosing between brands, or reacting to scarcity like limited time offers, all reflect calculations about timing, value, and the behavior of others. Retailers even design promotions with these reactions in mind, nudging customers toward faster decisions or higher spending. Online behavior too reflects this pattern. Liking a post, commenting, or sharing something controversial often involves a quick internal check. Who's going to see this? How will they respond? Will it invite backlash or support? Social media interactions are filled with subtle moves that shape reputation, influence, and group dynamics. In all these moments, people are constantly adjusting their behavior based on what others might do, say, or expect. They may not think of it as strategic reasoning, but that's what it is. Daily life is filled with small decisions that depend not just on personal preferences, but on how those choices fit into a shared space with others. The patterns may be subtle, but they're everywhere. Why do business use game theory without realizing it? What they're doing is using strategic thinking that mirrors the principles of game theory. Even if they've never studied the models, the logic behind their decisions often matches it step for step. At its core, this kind of thinking involves making choices based not just on your own goals, but on what others are likely to do in response. Most businesses don't operate in a vacuum. They're part of a market where actions echo. Every decision, whether it's pricing, advertising, or releasing a new product, happens in a shared space with other players who are also trying to win. Take pricing, for example. If a grocery chain suddenly lowers the cost of its most popular item, nearby competitors might feel pressured to match it. If they don't, customers might switch stores. But if everyone drops prices, profit margins shrink for all of them. That's not just a reaction. It's a chain of strategic moves based on mutual awareness. Each company is trying to predict what others will do and adjust accordingly. Or consider product launches. When two tech firms are racing to release the next big feature, timing becomes critical. If one moves too early, it risks bugs or weak sales. If it waits too long, it may lose market share. The right decision depends not just on internal readiness, but on the opponent's clock too. Companies end up making strategic bets, sometimes holding back or rushing forward based on signals from their rivals. Even in marketing, strategy comes into play. If one brand rolls out an emotional ad campaign, another might counter with humor or practicality, intentionally choosing a contrasting tone to carve out its own identity. It's not just about being creative, it's about positioning yourself in relation to others. These decisions often look like instinct or common sense, but they follow a deeper logic. Anticipate others, respond accordingly, and try to shape the playing field to your advantage. That's the foundation of strategic interaction. It doesn't require formal equations to be real. The thought process, what will they do if we do this, is the same. Sometimes, companies even end up in standoffs without meaning to. If two major firms hold off on discounts during the holiday season, it might look like cooperation. But it's more likely silent coordination, where both know that price cuts would spark a race to the bottom. Neither side wants to flinch first, and so the balance holds. In business, every move sends a message, and every silence does too. Companies learn over time how their rivals react. They adapt, not through formal strategy sessions, but through watching, adjusting, and making decisions that keep them competitive. Whether they call it game theory or not, the strategy is still there, quietly guiding what happens next. What drives high-stakes decisions? High-stakes decisions, whether between countries, political rivals, or coalition partners, This might look messy from the outside, but behind the scenes, many of these moves follow a kind of logic that game theory helps reveal. When the risks are enormous and the outcomes uncertain, strategy becomes everything. Take international diplomacy. Countries rarely act in isolation. A decision to impose sanctions, sign a treaty, or offer aid isn't just about self-interest, it's also about anticipating how others will react. If one country tightens trade, the other may retaliate. If it sends aid, it might be trying to build soft power. These choices are part of a strategic sequence where each side tries to stay one step ahead. A powerful example is the nuclear standoff. Two rival nations, both armed, know that if one attacks, the other will respond. The result? Mutually assured destruction. Neither wants to be the first to strike, and that hesitation creates a tense but stable balance. In game theory, this setup mirrors the chicken game, where players swerve to avoid disaster, not to win. Game theory also explains how elections play out. Candidates don't just push their own message, they adjust based on what others are saying. If one party leans into the economy, another might pivot to social values. A rising third-party candidate can shift the entire conversation. These aren't random moves. They're responsive strategies shaped by what opponents are likely to do next. Inside governments, decisions are equally calculated. Leaders building coalitions must navigate conflicting priorities, trade promises, and make concessions, all while trying to preserve influence. It's a game of give and take, where the goal isn't dominance, but just enough leverage to move things forward. Even public statements become strategic tools. A leader might announce they won't intervene, not because it's true, but because saying so buys time or lowers tension. Other times, a bluff is used to force a reaction. These signals, some subtle, some loud, shape how others act. What unites all these moments is uncertainty. No one has complete information. Decisions are made using partial insight, educated guesses, and instinct. That's why game theory matters here. It provides a structure for navigating unpredictability, not to tell leaders what to do, but to reveal the invisible logic underneath their moves. How has game theory shaped evolution in nature? In the natural world, survival isn't just about strength or speed. It's also about making the right moves at the right time. Animals compete, cooperate, and adapt their behavior based on what others around them are doing. This kind of interaction isn't random. It follows patterns that biologists have come to understand through strategy-based thinking. This is where game theory finds its place in evolution. It's not about conscious planning. Animals aren't solving equations, but the same logic applies. Strategies that work tend to stick around, and strategies that don't tend to fade out over generations. Over time, these patterns shape behavior in ways that can be studied and predicted. One of the simplest examples is seen in food competition. Imagine two animals competing for a limited food source. If they both go after it aggressively, they risk injury. If one backs down, it avoids harm but loses the meal. The best long-term approach might be a mix, sometimes fight, sometimes yield. These mixed strategies can actually stabilize over time, depending on how risky or rewarding each move is. This kind of behavior has been modeled in what's called the hawk-dove game. In this setup, hawks always fight and doves always back down. If everyone behaves like a hawk, the group suffers too many injuries. If everyone is a dove, resources are easily stolen. But when there's a mix of both behaviors in the population, the system finds a balance. That balance isn't chosen by anyone. It emerges naturally, as evolution favors strategies that lead to more survival and reproduction. Another classic case is in animal cooperation. Certain birds, for example, take turns acting as lookouts while the rest of the group feeds. At first glance, it seems selfless. But in a group where everyone takes turns, each bird gains protection over time. If one refuses to participate, others may stop protecting it in return. This back and forth is strategic, even if the birds aren't aware of the logic. Over generations, cooperative behavior gets rewarded when it improves group survival. These ideas also extend to more complex creatures. Among primates, for instance, grooming isn't just about hygiene, it's a social exchange. One monkey grooms another and expects the favor returned later. This kind of tit-for-tat behavior, repeated over time, helps build alliances and reduce conflict. In environments where cooperation increases chances of survival, strategic behavior becomes a biological advantage. Even viruses and bacteria follow strategic paths. Some microbes compete aggressively for resources, while others evolve to coexist more peacefully with their hosts. Those that strike a balance between spreading and not killing the host too quickly tend to last longer. The logic behind these patterns reflects strategic adaptation at the microscopic level. Game theory helps biologists make sense of how these behaviors evolve. It gives them a way to model situations where the success of one individual depends on the choices of others. Across species and ecosystems, strategy isn't just a human invention. It's part of how life works, adapts, and survives. Where do machines use game theory today? Every time your GPS reroutes you in traffic, a rideshare app adjusts prices, or an online ad competes for your attention, machines are making decisions in environments filled with other decision makers. They're not just running code, they're navigating interactions. And behind many of those decisions is strategy, quietly shaped by the logic of game theory. Modern artificial intelligence doesn't operate in isolation. It often functions in systems where multiple agents, human or machine, are involved, each with different goals and responses. To make these systems work smoothly, AI needs more than pattern recognition. It needs a way to predict what others might do and how to respond. That's where strategic reasoning becomes essential. One of the most visible examples is in online marketplaces. Platforms like Amazon or eBay host millions of sellers, each adjusting prices to stay competitive. Automated pricing tools monitor what competitors charge and adapt instantly. These tools essentially play a continuous game. If one seller lowers a price, others react. If someone raises theirs, others may follow. The algorithm's job isn't just to offer a good deal, it's to anticipate the moves of rivals and find a stable position that keeps profits flowing. In ride-sharing apps, pricing follows a similar pattern. During busy times, surge pricing kicks in. The system raises prices to balance supply and demand, but also based on how drivers and riders are likely to respond. If prices go too high, riders might cancel. If prices stay too low, not enough drivers log on. The algorithm has to find a balance, adjusting in real time while learning from past behavior. It's a dynamic interaction involving multiple players with conflicting interests. Cybersecurity is another key area. AI systems defending a network have to predict the behavior of attackers who may be using AI themselves. It becomes a strategic game of move and countermove. Defenders monitor for unusual patterns, while attackers try to avoid detection. The goal isn't just to react, it's to anticipate, much like a chess player thinking several moves ahead. Autonomous vehicles also use this kind of reasoning. When self-driving cars approach a four-way stop or navigate a lane merge, they must factor in the behavior of human drivers. Should they yield? Accelerate? Wait? These are not fixed answers. They're strategic, based on constantly updated predictions about how others will behave in that moment. Even in machine learning research, agents are trained through repeated interactions. Some learn to cooperate, others to compete. These simulations help build more adaptable, realistic AI systems by teaching them how to behave when the environment is shaped by others who also have goals. This is especially important in simulations where AI must coordinate with or outmaneuver others, like in finance, logistics, or multiplayer games. Strategic interaction is no longer limited to people. Machines are learning to handle complexity, respond to incentives, and navigate situations where every move affects the outcome. As AI becomes more integrated into daily life, its ability to reason through multiplayer environments isn't just helpful, it's essential. Why isn't game theory always accurate in the real world? Game theory sounds like it should be a perfect tool. It offers clean logic, structured models, and predictions about how people should act in strategic situations. But in real life, it often falls short. Not because the math is wrong, but because the world doesn't always follow the rules the models assume. At its core, game theory is based on a few key ideas: that people are rational, that they understand the situation they're in, and that they have clear preferences and access to all the relevant information. When these conditions hold, the predictions can be powerful. But in most real-world scenarios, one or more of those assumptions break down. One major limitation is incomplete information. In many everyday decisions, people simply don't know what others are thinking, planning, or capable of. A strategy that works well in theory often depends on knowing your opponent's moves or motivations. But if you're working with guesses, or worse, misinformation, it's easy to make the wrong call. Negotiations, for example, rarely involve full transparency. People hold back details, bluff, or change positions unexpectedly. That uncertainty can make even well-designed strategies collapse. Then there's the issue of irrational behavior. Game theory tends to assume that players act logically, always doing what benefits them most, but people don't always follow that path. Emotions like anger, fear, or pride can override calculations. Someone might reject a deal not because it's bad, but because they feel disrespected. Or they might take a risky stand just to prove a point. These reactions don't always fit into tidy equations, but they shape outcomes in powerful ways. Another challenge is changing incentives. In many real-life settings, the rules of the game shift mid-play. New players enter, stakes evolve, or the environment changes. A strategy that works today might backfire tomorrow. For instance, two companies might avoid a price war for years until a new competitor arrives and forces them to rethink everything. The flexibility of real-world situations makes static models less reliable over time. Even cultural context can matter. What's considered fair, aggressive, or cooperative varies across societies and industries. A strategy that looks effective in one culture might be misunderstood or even rejected in another. Game theory often uses universal logic, but real-world decisions are grounded in specific human environments. That's why researchers and strategists now use more flexible versions of game theory, models that include uncertainty, learning, and imperfect behavior. These newer approaches aim to capture the messier parts of human interaction. Still, no model can fully account for everything people do or why they do it. Game theory remains a useful lens. It helps highlight patterns anticipate conflict, and guide decisions. But the real world is complex, noisy, and often emotional. Strategy doesn't always follow the rules, because people don't either. And that's what makes prediction difficult, but decision-making so endlessly interesting. What are the limits of predicting human behavior through games? Game-based models are designed to simplify complex decisions. They break down situations into players, choices, outcomes, and motivations. With the right structure, these models can show patterns in how people respond to incentives. But there's a limit to how far this logic can go, especially when applied to real, emotional, inconsistent human lives. One major limit is assumed consistency. These models often expect people to behave the same way in similar situations, but in reality, behavior shifts depending on mood, context, or past experience. Someone might choose to cooperate in one scenario, then turn competitive the next, even if the setup looks identical on paper. Personal history, cultural background, or even what happened earlier that day can tip the decision in an unexpected direction. Another issue is that many models rely on complete information, the idea that everyone involved understands the rules, knows the stakes, and is aware of everyone else's options. But in most real-life situations, that just isn't true. People work with partial knowledge, make guesses, or misread intentions. A decision that seems irrational may simply be based on missing or misunderstood information. There's also the challenge of dynamic goals. In real life, people change their minds. What matters to someone at one moment, money, reputation, fairness, might shift as their circumstances evolve. Predicting behavior becomes even harder when the priorities themselves are constantly moving. A person negotiating a salary might care about prestige today and flexibility tomorrow. Those shifting values make long-term predictions unreliable. Emotions further complicate things. Game strategies often assume logical calculation, but decisions are influenced by fear, guilt, pride, excitement, factors that can override expected payoffs. A person might stay silent in a group discussion not because it's strategic, but because they're anxious. Someone might turn down a profitable offer because they feel disrespected. These emotional layers can't be captured by numbers alone. Even in structured environments like voting systems, legal negotiations, or workplace dynamics, people bend rules, act on principle, or prioritize relationships over outcomes. They might delay a decision out of politeness, give up an advantage to build trust, or make a choice that looks inefficient simply because it feels right. Over time, researchers have adjusted for these limits. Behavioral models now include uncertainty, bias, and habit. They use data from psychology, sociology, and even neuroscience to fill in the gaps. Still, no model can fully predict how a person will behave in every situation. Strategic games help highlight patterns and possibilities, but they don't capture everything. People are influenced by experience, personality, emotion, and context, all things that can shift from one moment to the next. Predicting behavior with perfect accuracy isn't possible, and that's exactly what makes studying it so endlessly complex and compelling. Why might some games never end or have changing rules? Not every game has a final move. Some keep going, changing shape as they unfold. The players shift, the rules evolve, and the end point, if it exists at all, keeps moving. These are the kinds of games that don't follow a fixed script, and they're more common in everyday life than most people realize. Traditional strategy models are often built around the idea of a closed game. There's a clear beginning, a set number of players, fixed rules, and a definite outcome. Think of a chess match. 2 players, clear objectives, and a winner at the end. But in many real-world situations, the structure is far more open. There's no set finish line, and the terms can change at any moment. One reason games don't end is because the players keep changing. In politics, for example, leadership transitions, alliances shift, and new issues emerge. A long-standing negotiation between countries might involve a rotating cast of diplomats and advisors. As new people step in, priorities are redefined. The game keeps going, not because no one wants resolution, but because the people involved and what they want keep evolving. Rules also change when the context shifts. Imagine two companies competing in a growing market. At first, the goal might be customer acquisition. Later, it becomes innovation. Then, it might turn into regulatory survival as laws tighten or technologies shift. What counted as a win in one stage no longer applies in the next. The structure bends to match new realities, and the game takes on new rules. Some games don't end because the incentives reward continuation. If maintaining the conflict, competition, or uncertainty benefits at least one side, there's no push to reach a conclusion. A business might keep a rival in legal limbo because it delays market entry. A political party might avoid compromise to keep its base energized. In these cases, the endless game becomes a strategy in itself. There's also the issue of undefined victory. In many complex systems, the goalposts are unclear. What does it mean to win in global diplomacy, public opinion, or long-term environmental planning? Without a clear endpoint, the process stretches out. Each decision becomes just one move in a much longer, uncertain sequence. Even in personal relationships or group dynamics, the rules can change mid-game. Friendships evolve, workplace norms shift, and what's acceptable one day might cause friction the next. These social games often operate without fixed rules. People adapt as they go, reacting to each other and to the world around them. These ongoing, evolving games challenge the idea of a perfect strategy. Success isn't always about reaching a final outcome. It's often about staying adaptable. When the players, rules, and objectives are in constant motion, the best move isn't always clear. What matters is the ability to keep playing, adjusting, and learning as the game unfolds. When can changing the rules be the smartest strategy? Sometimes the smartest move isn't to play harder, it's to change the game altogether. In strategy, there are moments when following the existing rules keeps you stuck, and the only real progress comes from redefining what those rules are. Most strategies assume that the conditions of the game are fixed, the players are set, the goals are clear, and the structure won't change. But in reality, many systems are more flexible than they appear. Rules, whether formal or informal, are often built on assumptions. And those assumptions can be challenged. Changing the rules doesn't always mean breaking them. It can mean reframing the objective, adjusting the boundaries, or introducing a new way to measure success. This shift can open up options that didn't exist before. One common example is in business. If two companies are locked in a pricing war, both might keep lowering costs until profits vanish. But instead of continuing to compete on price, one company might pivot, offering a premium service, building a community, or bundling their product with something else entirely. By changing how value is defined, they've stopped playing the same game. They're not just adjusting tactics, they're resetting the terms. Politics offers another example. If a party consistently loses in a majoritarian system, it might push for electoral reform, introducing ranked choice voting or proportional representation. These changes don't guarantee a win, but they reshape the playing field in a way that gives underrepresented groups a better chance. Instead of trying to win a losing battle, the strategy becomes about changing what winning even looks like. Even in personal settings, rule changing can be smart. Imagine a team in the workplace where credit always goes to whoever speaks the loudest. One member might shift the dynamic by documenting contributions or pushing for a clearer feedback system. They haven't rebelled against the group, they've changed how performance is recognized. The social rules around status and influence have quietly been rewritten. This also happens in negotiations. If two sides are stuck on a specific issue, introducing a new factor, an unrelated concession, a shared future goal, or a neutral third party, can reframe the entire process. By expanding the game, they make it possible to move forward without either side feeling like they've lost. What all these examples have in common is awareness. The people who change the rules aren't ignoring the game. They've understood it deeply enough to see its limits. They recognize when continuing under the same structure just leads to a stalemate. And they know how to shift the frame in a way that creates new movement. Changing the rules isn't always possible, but when it is, it can turn a no-win scenario into something entirely new. It's not about stepping outside the system, it's about reshaping it from within, making space for strategies that couldn't exist under the old design. What would life look like if we all understood game theory? Imagine a world where every driver at a four-way stop knew exactly what the others were thinking, where no one hesitated, no one rushed, and everyone moved smoothly through. That's the kind of everyday difference a deeper understanding of strategy could make. Not perfect prediction, but smarter coordination. That's what life might look like if everyone understood how strategic thinking works. At its heart, game theory is about how decisions affect one another. It's not just about what's best for you. It's about what's best for you, given what everyone else might do. When people understand that dynamic, they start making choices that are not only smarter for themselves, but more stable and predictable for others too. In everyday life, this could shift how people handle conflict. Instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, someone who sees the broader structure might pause, weigh the incentives, and pick a response that de-escalates the situation. Arguments become less about winning and more about anticipating how to get to a better result for everyone involved. It could also change how people cooperate. If everyone understood the risks and rewards of trust, teamwork might become less fragile. In situations where mutual benefit depends on both sides showing up, people might be more inclined to honor their commitments, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because they can see the logic of long-term gain. Even competition would look different. Rather than racing to beat each other in ways that destroy value, like undercutting prices or burning out from overwork, rivals might learn when to compete and when to pull back. Knowing the difference between a zero-sum game, where one wins and one loses, and a non-zero-sum game, where both can benefit, becomes a major advantage. Parenting, teaching, and leadership could all become more strategic. Instead of relying on rewards and punishments alone, decision makers would think more about how incentives shape behavior. Rules and structures would be built with more attention to how people actually respond to choices, not just how they're supposed to. In larger systems like governments or global negotiations, a shared understanding of strategy could reduce some of the gridlock. When all sides understand the same basic logic, how mutual concessions can unlock cooperation, or how trust builds through repeated interaction, it becomes easier to find stable agreements, even across competing interests. This isn't about turning everyone into calculating machines. It's about giving people a clearer lens. When someone sees not just their own options, but the whole web of choices and reactions around them, decisions get smarter. The world becomes less reactive and more intentional. Understanding strategy doesn't eliminate conflict or competition, but it helps people navigate both with fewer surprises, less waste, and more room for outcomes where everyone can do a little better. The more people grasp how actions shape reactions, the more the everyday world begins to function, not perfectly, but more predictably, and often more fairly. Why does seeing life as a game sometimes help us navigate it? Sometimes life makes more sense when you stop taking every moment personally and start seeing it as part of a bigger system. That's why viewing life as a game, complete with players, rules, moves, and outcomes, can actually help people make better decisions and reduce unnecessary stress. This perspective doesn't mean treating everything as a joke or competition. It means recognizing that many everyday situations follow patterns. People have goals. They react to incentives. They adjust their behavior based on what others do. Just like in a game, there are strategies at play, even if no one calls them that out loud. Thinking this way helps take some of the confusion out of social dynamics. For example, in a workplace, people may seem difficult or uncooperative. But if you look at the incentives they're responding to, like pressure from management or fear of missing a promotion, their behavior starts to make more sense. They're not just being stubborn, they're playing to win within a structure that rewards certain actions. The same idea applies in relationships. Misunderstandings and conflict often come from mismatched expectations or unclear rules. Seeing a relationship as a kind of cooperative game can help people realize that both sides need to keep the game working. Communication, trust, and give and take become the strategies that lead to long-term stability. No one's keeping score, but everyone wants the interaction to continue. Even high-pressure moments can feel more manageable with this lens. If you're giving a presentation, negotiating a deal, or trying to diffuse an argument, it helps to remember that you're not the only person with something on the line. Others have their own strategies, constraints, and concerns. Instead of reacting emotionally, you can step back, assess the situation like a player would, and respond more effectively. One benefit of thinking this way is detachment, not in a cold or dismissive way, but enough to avoid overreacting. If a game doesn't go your way, you adjust your strategy. You don't assume the universe is against you. That mindset can help reduce frustration and focus your energy on what you can control. This perspective also encourages flexibility. Good players don't just memorize one approach. They adapt based on what others do. Life's unpredictability becomes less threatening when it's expected, even welcomed. You're not thrown off course by every twist, because you've already accepted that the game can shift. Seeing life as a game doesn't mean everything becomes predictable or easy, but it provides a structure, a mental model for understanding behavior, managing expectations, and improving outcomes. When people step back and look at the patterns around them, they're often better equipped to move forward. Not with perfect certainty, but with enough clarity to make smarter, more confident decisions in a world that doesn't always come with clear instructions. Where do we go from here in the future of game theory? The original goal of game theory was simple: understand how people make decisions when their outcomes depend on others. But over time, that goal has grown. Today, it's not just a tool for economists or strategists. It's becoming part of how machines learn, how governments plan, and how everyday systems adapt. The question now isn't where game theory started, it's where it's headed. For decades, the field focused on structured problems, small groups of players, clear choices, fixed rules. These models helped explain things like auctions, negotiations, and voting behavior. But real life isn't always that tidy. People change their minds, new players enter, the rules evolve. That's why the future of game theory is moving toward models that can handle complexity, uncertainty, and constant change. One of the biggest shifts is in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Modern AI systems don't just follow instructions, they interact. Self-driving cars, for example, don't operate in isolation. They share roads with human drivers, pedestrians, and other machines. They have to make decisions on the fly, based on incomplete information and unpredictable behavior. That's not traditional programming, it's strategic reasoning. Researchers are building AI systems that use adaptive strategies, learning how to play and respond like human decision makers in an ever-changing environment. Another growing area is multi-agent systems. These are environments where many independent entities, people, software, robots, make decisions that affect each other. From drone fleets to decentralized finance platforms, these systems require coordination and conflict management. Future models of game theory are being designed to track and balance hundreds or even thousands of players interacting simultaneously with goals that overlap or compete. The field is also expanding into social systems and behavioral dynamics. Researchers are combining game theory with psychology, looking at how emotions, habits, and social norms influence decisions. They're creating more realistic models that include not just ideal strategies, but also how real people behave when facing pressure, risk, or uncertainty. These insights are being used to design better public policies, improve group decision-making, and even shape digital platforms to encourage healthier online behavior. In global challenges like climate change, cybersecurity, and resource sharing, new forms of game theory are helping countries, corporations, and communities think beyond short-term gains. Future frameworks aim to support cooperation over time, even when trust is low or interests don't align. The focus is on designing incentives, feedback loops, and structures that nudge players toward outcomes that are sustainable, not just profitable. Game theory is moving from being a model of what happens on paper to a toolkit for what needs to work in practice. The goal is no longer just to describe behavior, but to shape environments that produce better decisions. As technology grows more connected and systems grow more complex, strategic thinking will be embedded deeper into how decisions are made, not just by people, but increasingly by the machines and networks we rely on every day.